know where to begin with this, but I feel like I need to tell someone about what happened to me last night. I'm not sure if anyone will even believe me, but I swear every word of this is true. It started off as a normal Thursday evening. I had just gotten home from my job waiting tables and was unwinding with some TV before bed. Around 11 p.m., I started to feel tired, so I turned off the lights and climbed into bed. That's when things started to get weird. Right as I was drifting off to sleep, I was jolted awake by the sound of something hitting my bedroom window. My apartment is on the 3rd floor, so it freaked me out that something could reach that high. I tried to brush it off as just my imagination, but then I heard it again, thunk, and again, thunk. I was paralyzed in my bed, listening to whatever was outside repeatedly banging on the window. My curtains were closed, so I couldn't see anything, which somehow made it even more terrifying. After a few minutes of this, my fear gave way to anger. I couldn't just cower under my sheets all night. I had to confront whatever was out there. I leapt out of bed, threw open the curtains, and came face to face with nothing. Just the empty night sky over the city. I let out a huge sigh of relief. It must have just been a tree branch or something that I mistook for something more sinister. Feeling a bit foolish, I closed the curtains again and got back into bed. As soon as my head hit the pillow, the banging started up again. Thunk, thunk, thunk. My brief feeling of relief vanished, replaced by even deeper dread than before. Something wanted my attention, desperately. This time I tried a different approach. "Hello?" I called out tentatively. "Is someone there?" The banging stopped abruptly. For a moment, everything was eerily silent. Then, to my horror, a voice called back to me through the glass. "Let me in." It sounded like a man, his voice low and rough around the edges. I stayed frozen under the covers, trying to convince myself this was just a vivid nightmare. "Let me in," the voice insisted, louder this time. "It's cold out here." "Who are you?" I replied, my own voice shaking. "What do you want from me? You know who I am," the voice snarled. "Now open this window before I break it down." At this point, I was convinced no good could come from engaging with whatever was on the other side of that glass. I pulled the blankets up over my head like a shield and tried drowning it out. Seconds later, my window exploded in a hail of glass as something huge forced its way into my bedroom. I'm ashamed to admit it, but I totally lost it and started screaming uncontrollably. I could hear heavy footsteps on the floor moving toward me. The thing let out an awful, gurgling laugh. "There's nowhere left to hide," it rasped. "You're mine now." I felt a vice-like grip close around my ankle through the blanket and start dragging me off the bed. This monstrous thing was going to kill me, or worse if I didn't get away. With strength I didn't know I had, I kicked and thrashed violently until I broke free from its grasp. Not looking back, I leapt off the bed and bolted for the door. The creature bellowed in rage behind me. I sprinted down the hall to the front door, leaving it smashed to pieces in my bedroom. I ran out into the night in my pajamas, screaming for help. Within minutes, lights in neighboring apartments began flipping on. I collapsed in the entryway, shaking and crying hysterically. The police arrived shortly after, and I tried to explain what had happened between panicked sobs. After calming me down, 2 officers came with me back to the apartment to investigate. But when we entered my bedroom, there was no broken glass, no damaged window, no hulking intruder. Everything looked totally undisturbed. Needless to say, the cops thought I was either crazy or on drugs. No amount of pleading convinced them it was real. I can hardly blame them. I know how unbelievable it sounds now in the light of day. But I know what I experienced last night. This thing came for me, and next time I might not escape. I wish I could give you more answers, but I have none. All I know is my peaceful life has been shattered. Wherever I go, I feel its presence lurking in the shadows. I can't keep running forever. One way or another, it will find me again. And I fear that when it does, I won't live to tell about it. I'm sorry for dropping such a bizarre story on you out of the blue. I just really needed to get this off my chest, even if it makes me sound insane. Hopefully putting it out there can lift some of the weight from my mind, at least temporarily. I don't expect you to have any solutions for me. I guess I'm just trying to make sense of it all. Anyhow, thanks for listening to me ramble. I appreciate you taking the time. Wish me luck out there. I have a feeling I'm going to need it. When I was a kid, There was an old house at the end of my block that all the neighborhood children avoided. Not because it was creepy or dilapidated. On the contrary, it was a lovely 2-story Victorian with a well-manicured lawn and rose garden. No, we stayed away because of the owner, Mr. Renault. Mr. Renault was a retired widower who had moved onto our street a few years before I was born. By all accounts, he was a model citizen, always friendly and cheerful when he ventured out, which was rare. He tended dutifully to his garden daily but otherwise kept to himself. Yet despite his pleasant demeanor, there was something off-putting about him. His smile seemed just a touch too broad, his eyes a bit too intense. He made the other adults nervous, though they could never say exactly why. So parents warned their children to steer clear of Mr. Renault and his home. Naturally, this only increased our curiosity. We took to spying on the old house from a distance, inventing sinister theories about what Mr. Renault was secretly up to. My friends and I imagined him as an evil wizard or mad scientist conducting diabolical experiments in his basement. But the truth ended up being much more disturbing than our childish guesses. It began with the disappearances. Every couple years, someone would vanish without a trace from the neighborhoods around town. First, it was a teen girl walking home from a party, then a mechanic's wife, a college student home for summer break. No one could find any connection between the missing. Until one spring morning when I was 8 years old, I was cutting through a wooded lot near Mr. Renault's house, a shortcut I often took to meet friends. Crouching behind some bushes, I noticed Mr. Renault in his backyard garden on the other side of the fence. What I saw next I'll never forget. Mr. Renault was busily digging in one of his expanded flower beds. After he had hollowed out a fairly large hole, he walked over to his tool shed and pulled something out in a wheelbarrow. My breath caught as I realized it was a body wrapped in plastic. I wanted to run but was paralyzed by fear and the macabre scene unfolding before me. Mr. Renault casually loaded the body into the fresh hole. But before covering it back up, he did something that gave me nightmares for years after. He leaned down and propped the body's head up so that it appeared to be awkwardly sitting upright in the hole. Then he spread the lips back into an exaggerated, cheerful smile. My stomach lurched as Mr. Renault patted dirt around the corpse, packing the soil snugly to hold it in place. He carefully replanted flowers and grass over the makeshift grave, humming pleasantly the entire time like it was the most normal chore imaginable. As if he hadn't just buried some poor soul in his backyard with a grisly, forced grin. I stayed hidden in those bushes, shaking long after Mr. Renault went back inside his house. I considered telling my parents, but feared they wouldn't believe me. I knew all too well what lurked behind the friendly facade of Mr. Renault's suburban home. This was the evil we had whispered about for so many years. I never saw where the other bodies were buried, but I imagined his whole yard contained the remains of his innocent victims. Their decomposing corpses are tucked away under flower beds and vegetable gardens, frozen in time with the same awful smile he had given that sad soul I saw interred that day. My friends and I referred to it as the Smiling Garden after that. A reminder that true darkness often hides behind a mask of normalcy. Mr. Renault tended that gruesome yard for years before he passed away when I was in high school. But the house has sat empty ever since. No one has had the courage to occupy the home or disturb its secrets buried deep within the earth. Eventually the house was torn down, but the gardens remain mostly overgrown and untended. Neighbors still swear the ghostly outlines of smiling faces can be seen pressing up through the weeds if you look at the right moment. I walk by the abandoned lot sometimes, remembering the horror I witnessed from those bushes so many years ago. Wondering how many more victims of Mr. Renault's madness still lay beneath the soil, their lifeless mouths stretched into his grisly mockery of cheerfulness, waiting for the day they may finally emerge and be found, no longer hidden away in the dark. For evil, this black leaves scars that bleed through even the brightest facade. It stains the earth, etching grim echoes into the foundations of a community. And one haunted patch of land carries those phantoms for all time. A reminder that not every garden is as idyllic and safe as it appears. That fresh horror may bloom in even the most carefully tended soil, and darkness takes many forms when it flowers, some smiling, some screaming, but all equally deadly when seated in such malignant ground. When I was a kid growing up in rural Nebraska, there was an old railway crossing about a mile into the forest behind my house. The tracks had been abandoned decades before, but still remained, cutting a narrow path through the dense woods. According to local legend, if you stood at the crossing exactly at midnight, you could hear the phantom sounds of a train approaching in the distance. First, the mournful wail of a horn, then the clacking of iron wheels over warped rails, rumbling louder as an ethereal engine came barreling down the forgotten line. Finally, it would burst from the trees in a blaze of billowing steam and ghostly light, a spectral locomotive roaring past just feet away before vanishing into the night. Witnesses to this midnight train often turned up dead the very next day under mysterious circumstances. Some said if the phantom train managed to make direct eye contact with you, it would steal your soul or bring a death omen. For who could glimpse such an unearthly sight and continue living unchanged? Naturally, as impressionable teens, my friends and I were obsessed with the legend. We would gather at the old railway crossing and stay up late swapping stories about the doomed midnight train, daring one another to be the first to see it. But our determination was always outweighed by the fear of what might happen if the ghostly engine actually appeared. No one was quite bold or stupid enough to remain at the crossing until the fateful hour. And so the myth lived on in our imaginations and campfire tales. That all changed the summer before I started college. A few friends and I were hanging out drinking late one August night when we got onto the topic of the midnight train. Fueled by liquid courage, we decided tonight was finally the night we would stay put and see if the legends were true. Too excited to be properly afraid, we waited at the dark railway crossing, watching the minutes tick by. The old rusty tracks cut through the woods before us, disappearing into shadows. The only sounds were crickets and the gentle summer breeze through the trees. As midnight approached, I felt a slight uneasiness in my gut. Maybe this wasn't such a great idea after all. But before I could suggest leaving, the air took on an electric charge. The wind picked up, scattering old leaves across our feet. Just then we heard it, the mournful wail of a train horn in the far distance, drifting between the trees like an echo from the past. The sound instantly raised goosebumps on my arms. My friends and I exchanged panicked looks as the horn grew louder, heralding the phantom train's approach. The warning crossbars lowered and lights began flashing urgently, though no living soul had manned that station in decades. My heart dropped as the ground started to faintly rumble beneath our feet. Conflicting impulses to flee or stay rooted to the spot paralyzed me. Moments later, a blinding light pierced the darkness down the tracks. An ear-splitting shriek of steel on steel rent the air as the specter emerged in a roaring din of engine fury and swirling ethereal vapors. The midnight train thundered towards us, its billowing steam glowing white-hot and windows ablaze with unearthly fire. Inside, shadowy ghost passengers screamed and pounded the glass, desperate to escape their damnation. Transfixed by fear, all we could do was grip each other and scream as the train roared directly through us at impossible speed. The phantasmal engine radiated a bone-chilling cold that froze me to my core. Its deafening passage seemed to last both an instant and an eternity before the spectral train disappeared down the line, leaving utter silence in its wake. Released from our horrified trance, my friends and I scrambled back through the woods in a blind panic. We didn't stop running until safe in my house with the lights on and doors locked. We all swore never to speak of what happened that night, or return to the haunted railway crossing. In the sober light of day, we convinced ourselves it had to be a shared hallucination or prank, until a week later when one friend turned up dead after a mysterious accident. Then another succumbed to an aggressive illness that baffled doctors. Soon only 2 of us remained, and I knew then the midnight train was no mere legend. It had come to collect its mortal fare from all who dared witness its otherworldly passage that fateful night. Now so many years later, only I am left to tell this tale before my own rendezvous with death arrives. I have moved far from my rural hometown, yet can never completely outrun the phantom locomotive that haunts my dreams. On certain lonely nights, I still hear the shrill horn, smell the burning coal, and feel the icy chill that heralded my doom. Drawing nearer to a course I cannot stop, for I have seen the midnight train come round the bend beyond the vale, and it will return to claim one final passenger before my life's journey reaches its end. So heed well this warning. The rails through the darkened wood lead only to sorrow and regret.